Hello everybody and welcome to this programme. We're just on the taxi out to the runway here at Aberdeen for a return flight back to Heathrow, and as you can tell from the title of the video, something a bit nasty is going to happen. I think it's important to, or at least interesting to know how to deal with abnormal as well as normal situations in the sim, because in real life that's really what the pilots get paid for, to react efficiently to abnormal and emergency situations. So how does the rejected takeoff work? Well, it's obviously a way of stopping us continuing into the air with a particular malfunction or emergency, but it's not quite as simple as you should stop if you get a problem before V1, you should continue if you get one afterwards. You may be taking off on a wet runway with a poor runway surface, or a short runway as we have here at Aberdeen. Well, it's relatively short for an Airbus anyway. There may come a point in the takeoff roll when it would be better to take a problem up into the air than to try and stop. This is obviously where pilot judgment comes in. To give you a very obvious example, if you get a brakes hot ECAM caution during the takeoff roll, which I don't believe is an inhibited caution at this stage of flight, so it could possibly come up, it would clearly be perverse in that case to stop. You'd have to use maximum braking, which would be difficult to achieve because the brake efficiency would be reduced because of the high temperatures. You'd make the brake temperatures significantly worse by applying maximum braking, and you'd almost certainly blow the tyres out or wreck the brakes, or even worse. Instead, you'd carry on, leave the gear down after takeoff to get some airflow around the brakes, and fly at a suitable speed for the extended gear until the temperature is reduced to normal. Now obviously that's a pathetically obvious example, but you still get my point. This exercise uses a lot of judgment, and there are no absolutely hard and fast rules for when you should stop or when you should go with a malfunction before V1. And by the way, for those of you who don't know, V1 is our takeoff decision speed, the speed at which we are committed to the takeoff in the event of a malfunction. So, although it is a matter of judgment, there are still some guides to help us along. And the Airbus training manuals talk of the idea of being go-minded, because they think that trying to stop with relatively trivial faults can cause more harm than good. Certainly, as the aircraft approaches V1, Airbus recommend being more go than stop minded, clearly because you have less runway to play with and you've also got higher speed to counteract. So some basic decision management guidelines from Airbus: split the takeoff roll into segments, the segments being before 100 knots, after 100 knots and below V1, and V1 and afterwards. Before 100 knots there's clearly more viability in a stop situation, so essentially any ECAM warning or caution, except for hot brakes perhaps, could trigger you to discontinue the takeoff. After 100 knots, however, with less runway and more speed picked up, rejection is a more serious matter, and particularly when you're on a wet or slippery runway, or a runway with poor condition, or indeed a short runway. Matters that would trigger a rejection after 100 knots are therefore more likely to be things like fire or severe damage, engine failure or sudden loss of thrust, any indication that would render the aeroplane unflyable, essentially any red ECAM warning, or the listed ECAM cautions. And as we've said, once you're above V1, you have to continue up into the air. So we'll see in a moment how this works in action, but because the procedure happens so quickly, I thought I'd talk it through with you first so you know what to look out for. Then you can replicate it in your own simulation operations if you wish. So in the event of an ECAM alert, you'll decide whether to stop or go, and if it's stop, then you close the thrust levers to idle, apply max reverse thrust, and confirm that we have max reverse here on the ECAM, and you also monitor brake response. There is technically a decel light in the max push button, so when the brakes come on you would expect the decel light to come on, but unfortunately because of the brake logic this only happens when you get more than 80% braking capacity, and as you'll see this doesn't always happen, and it's another reason why you may want to think twice before rejecting a takeoff instead of taking it up into the air, particularly when runway space is limited. So you really just have to monitor braking action, make sure that the aircraft is decelerating. It's unlikely that you'll get a decel light here at the push button, and if you do it may be intermittent, so that's really not a useful indication. Instead what you're really doing is monitoring the brake response to make sure that the aircraft is actually decelerating. Before stopping you touch the toe brakes to disarm the auto brake system, and then once you're stopped stow the reversers, apply the parking brake, call cabin crew to your stations on the PA, which isn't applicable to us in the simulator obviously, and then call for the ECAM actions, which you would then complete. So there's the procedure. We'll now head off and try and take off to Heathrow. I'm going to select the pop-up ECAM screen here so you can see what's going on a little more clearly, and we'll do the before takeoff checklist below the line. It's going to be a packs off takeoff. Transponder on, weather radar on and predicted wind shear auto, and the before takeoff checklist below the line. Cabin crew is advised, TCAS TA RA, engine mode selector normal, and packs off. Takeoff checklist below the line complete. We're going to line up onto runway 16 now here at Aberdeen. Because I found it a little bit difficult to do the rejected takeoff procedure and talk at the same time, I thought I'd do a voiceover over the top of the footage instead to guide you through what we're doing. So we're advancing the thrust levers now as normal to stabilise the engines prior to takeoff, and then once stabilised, adding takeoff power. So we have man toga SRS runway auto thrust blue on the FMA and accelerating normally. So there we have the ECAM warning, engine fire number 1, cancel the warning audio, apply reverse, and the brakes worked automatically, disconnecting with the toe brakes just before stopping, stowing the reversers as well, apply the parking brake and carry out the ECAM actions. So engine master number 1 off, engine fire push button push, agent 1 discharge, agent 2 discharge, and as you can see, firing the fire bottles has now extinguished the fire. The fire light in the fire push button's gone out, the ECAM warning is extinguished as well, and we're left with an engine fail ECAM caution. And that's the fire situation complete. If the fire hadn't gone out and we needed to evacuate the airplane, then the procedure would be to obviously bring the aircraft to a stop, which we'd already done. Parking brake we'd make sure was on. We'd alert the cabin crew. We'd also check to make sure that if we'd been using manual pressure, obviously the pressure system on the Airbus is automatic, but if we'd been using manual pressure, we'd need to make sure that the pressure differential between the inside and outside was 0, and we could do that on the pressure page, looking at the differential here, which as you can see is 0, and just making sure, but this would only be of course if we'd been using the manual pressure mode. in normal circumstances we'd always use it in automatic. We then make sure all engine masters are off. All fire push buttons are pushed. And we could also discharge the agents if required. We've had an engine fire on engine 1 and we've discharged both agents into engine 1 already, but we could do so for the APU and engine 2. It won't be necessary in this case, but this would generally be used if the aircraft, for example, had gone off the end of the runway and there was a fire risk to the remaining engine and the APU as well. And then we would initiate the evacuation, so call on the PA, evacuate, evacuate, and then it's a nice trip down the slide. So there we are, there's a brief look at the rejected takeoff and the engine fire situation in the Airbus. It's all made very, very straightforward by the ECAM, which is a superb tool, and the FS Labs A320, as you'd expect, simulates it very well. Hope you enjoyed that. There'll be plenty more abnormal emergencies to come. We'll be having a look at engine failures in flight and things like that. So do keep tuned, keep subscribed, and ask any questions in the comments below if you have any. Thanks very much for watching.